Today is the 24th of April, as we all know, which is actually the 106th anniversary of the start of the Easter Rising in Dublin, which is obviously one of the keystone moments leading to the development of the Irish Republic. The reason for this ride is to actually look at mainly to look at the part that London actually played in the lead up to the Easter Rising in Dublin. Apart from that, there's a couple of other little diversions we'll do as well. One of the things that I actually sort of found preparing this ride is actually you could do about 100 different rides about Irish London, themed on whatever you want, and maybe we'll come back to that at some other point. So that's just to let you know why it's called the Easter Riding, which people might have thought, well, it's not Easter or whatever, it's because of the Easter Rising. So on that note, then we'll settle up and go.
The Greek Orthodox Church this weekend, it's Easter.
Oh, right, okay. So this here, I'm not completely sure which part of this building, which is over the building that used to be here, which was the site of the London branch of the Morgan Guarantee Trust of New York, which later became JP Morgan. And this is where Michael Collins had his last job in London. He worked here up until the 14th of January 1916, some 3 months before the Easter Rising. He'd hoped to get a transfer from here to one of their offices in the United States to avoid conscription into the British Army. But this didn't come to pass. He realised that his conscription was closer and closer, so he ended up giving a week's notice to his employers here, telling them that he couldn't wait for the call up, but he'd enlist anyway. So the bosses were very impressed with his patriotism, and they gave him an extra week's salary. So he gave that money to the IRB, and he didn't enlist. So that's our first stop. So this is the site of the old Newgate prison, and the last public hanging in Britain was here, where Michael Barrett, who'd taken part in the Fenian bombing of the Clerkenwell House of Correction, was hanged. And we'll hear more about the Clerkenwell explosion later. But one of the things, there had been a growing movement about public hangings and people not wanting to have public hangings. And this was a trigger because there were quite a lot of demonstrations about the hanging of Michael Barrett, and then they changed the law. So subsequently all hangings were held inside the prison grounds rather than actually open to the public. I beg your pardon? Right. I didn't know that. That's good information. So this is another one of the locations where I'm not absolutely certain which building it is that I'm going to be talking about, but 56 Fetter Lane, which I couldn't identify when I came down here before, it was the site of the Shamrock pub, which was one of the favourite pubs of the Irish community in this part of London in the early 1900s. And it's where Michael Collins was introduced by Sam Maguire, another great Republican leader who went on to lead and develop the Gaelic Athletic Association in Ireland. He was introduced by Sam Maguire to Peadar Carney in 1909, and Carney composed the Soldier Song, which became the anthem of the Irish Republic, and he, as Sam Maguire, were involved in sort of the founding of the Gaelic Athletic Association. So when I was preparing this route, the numbering of this road defeated me, and Alex worked out as we were coming along that this is actually the building that was the site of the Workmen's Legal Friendly Society, and this was during the early 1900s. But more importantly, it was the London headquarters of Sinn Féin. It was also called the National Club and was also a branch of the Gaelic League. So again, it's another important part of London's Irish political revolutionary development and the history of nationalism in London and in Ireland. So, Trafalgar Square, arguably one of the world's greatest centres for celebrations and protests, certainly for this country. And on the 13th of November 1887, there was a protest here against the imprisonment of William O'Brien MP after the Mitchelstown massacre in County Cork. And in County Cork, the massacre, 3 protesters were killed by police. They were protesting against new land laws out there that were affecting the tenant farmers. O'Brien, the MP, was accused of incitement under a new Coercion Act which was brought in because of the unrest in Ireland at that time. Thousands came here to attend the protest and hundreds were injured as police and military attacked the protesters. And amongst those known to be there during this protest were William Morris, John Burns, George Bernard Shaw, Annie Besant and Frank Kitts. The day was called Bloody Sunday, which is perhaps the first time that was actually used as a name for a day in Irish history, but unfortunately it wasn't the last. On the 4th of February 1868, here a daughter was born to Sir Henry Gore Booth and Georgina Hill, and she was named Constance Georgina Gore Booth. In later life she was known as Countess Constance Markievicz, and she was heavily involved in the Easter Rising and in the leadership of the Irish nationalists at the time. And she went on to become Britain's first woman MP when she stood for and gained a seat in Ireland for Sinn Féin.
Well, there's also freedom of religious expression in this country. And you are just as much allowed to preach the gospel as you are allowed to protest politically. And what is more, you are allowed in this country to use a microphone and a speaker to proclaim your message, whether it's a political message or whether it is a religious message. And you are allowed to preach, you are allowed to proclaim between the hours of 7 o'clock in the morning and 9 o'clock at night, 7 days a week, 365 days a year.
That's interesting, I never knew that. interesting that on the 106th anniversary of the Easter Rising, there's no flags, which you'd think that they would be flying, because most embassies have a flag flying from dawn till dusk, don't they? And I quickly tried to find out something about the Irish Embassy for today, and all I was able to find out was that the Irish Embassy has been here since the 25th of December 1949. The building was leased from the Duke of Westminster, who in turn leased it then to the Irish Commissioner of Public Works. And obviously there's been a whole wealth of people coming to this place, political people, cultural people, arts people, you name it, any sort of sector that people are involved in who are Irish or the Irish want to have contacts with, they will have come through these doors. So this is 36 Eaton Place, and it was the home of Field Marshal Sir Henry Wilson. He was a hardline unionist during the before and during the First World War, and he was a prime mover in the Curragh incident, when he encouraged senior officers to resign from the British Army rather than move against the Ulster Volunteers. He was also involved in the Irish War of Independence and was heavily implicated in pogroms against nationalists in Northern Ireland. On the 22nd of June 1922, he was shot dead here by Reginald Dunn and Joseph O'Sullivan, two IRA volunteers. They were hanged at Wandsworth Prison, where they were buried, and their bodies were exhumed and returned to Ireland in 1967. It's said that this incident was the spark that led to the start of the Irish Civil War. As a result of police investigations into this killing, centring on Sam Maguire, who I mentioned earlier on, who by then was Michael Collins' Chief Intelligence Officer in London, Maguire fled back to Dublin. What's that? There's a plaque just on this building for Jane Austen there as well. This building here, 22 Hands Place, is where the Irish, or a good proportion of the Irish delegation for the treaty negotiations after the Civil War and so on, the War of Independence, sorry, were centred here. And this is the actual building where the negotiations took place, and it's also where the signing of the treaty was made on the 6th of December 1921. Michael Collins, one of the signatories to this, famously said that he'd signed his own death warrant by signing this, and some 8 months later he was assassinated in an ambush in County Cork. So he was a clairvoyant as well as a great leader. James, it's good to be down Brompton Road, isn't it? On your Brompton. So, I don't think any Irish themed ride around London could miss coming to see a place that Oscar Wilde lived in or was involved in. Oscar Wilde and his wife Constance lived here from January 1885 until he was imprisoned in May of 1895. Whilst here he wrote The Happy Prince and Other Tales, The Picture of Dorian Gray, Lady Windermere's Fan, and The Importance of Being Earnest. And it was here that the Marquis of Queensberry appeared in 1894 to confront Wilde about his association with his son, Lord Alfred Douglas Bosie. Queensberry was thrown out, and subsequently Wilde sued the Marquess for libel. The action failed, and it resulted in Wilde being prosecuted for homosexual offences, and he was sentenced to 2 years in prison. And at Wilde's creditors' insistence, chief amongst them the Marquess of Queensberry, the entire contents of the house were auctioned off. And it was said by William Rothenstein, an associate of Wilde's, that the house was filled with a jostling crowd, most of whom had just come out of curiosity to see the great man's effects. This is 96 Cheyne Walk, and in the 1970s Tory MP Paul Channon lived here, and it was here that members of the British government, including Willie Whitelaw, the Northern Ireland Secretary, secretly met members of Sinn Féin and the IRA on the 7th of July 1972, at a time when the public were being told that ministers would never talk to terrorists, which they saw Sinn Féin and the IRA as being. The Irish delegation was led by Martin McGuinness and Gerry Adams. McGuinness was then 22 and on the run from the authorities in Northern Ireland, and only attended as his safety was guaranteed. Gerry Adams was released from prison to take part in the talks. Their journey to the meeting was a bit like a Cold War spy film. They and 4 others met in Derry. They were transported in a blacked out van to a field where an army helicopter flew them to Aldergrove Airport near Belfast. And when the party got off the helicopter, one of the squaddies there gave them a salute. It's not known if he knew who they were. They were then flown from Aldergrove to Northolt and then driven to Cheyne Walk in the company of Special Branch. Around the negotiating table, the Irish delegates listed their conditions: that the British government recognised the right of Irish self-determination, that troops be withdrawn by the 1st of January 1975, some 2.5 years after the date of the meeting, and that all political prisoners be granted an amnesty. This was dismissed out of hand by the British, but importantly, it was the first time during the Troubles where there were high-level negotiations between the leaders of the government and also the leaders of Sinn Féin and IRA. Thank you.